I have no savings. I might lose my home. These weren't the words of a struggling musician, but of rock legend David Crosby in 2020, just 3 years before his death. After selling millions of records and creating some of the most iconic songs in music history, how could this happen? Today we're going behind closed doors to reveal the devastating financial decisions that forced Crosby to sell his entire music catalog, his life's work, just to stay afloat. In an era when record contracts routinely exploited artists, Crosby fell victim to terrible 1960s deals that paid pennies per album, while his own demons drove him to spend whatever came in. From platinum records to a crushing $3 million IRS debt, this is the hidden money story of a rock icon who had everything and then lost it all. Most rock stars come from humble beginnings, but David Crosby's story starts with a silver spoon. Born in Los Angeles in 1941, Crosby grew up surrounded by Hollywood success. His father, Floyd Crosby, was an Academy Award-winning cinematographer who worked on classics like High Noon. The Crosby household buzzed with classical music and sophisticated jazz, exposing young David to musical excellence from the start. My dad wanted me to follow a traditional path. When I dropped out of drama school to play music in coffee houses, he thought I was throwing my life away. Crosby later recalled. He found himself playing small clubs for pocket change, sleeping on couches, and struggling to make ends meet. Everything changed in 1964 when Crosby joined the Byrds. With his distinctive mustache and tinted granny glasses, Crosby's look embodied the emerging counterculture. Their electrified folk rock sound and cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man shot to #1 in 1965. For 24-year-old Crosby, success came suddenly. Television appearances, screaming fans, and the illusion of unlimited wealth. Behind this overnight fame lurked a financial trap. The Byrds' Columbia Records contract followed standard industry practices that heavily favored the label. Despite generating millions in revenue, band members received only 2 to 3% royalty rates on retail sales. After deducting recording costs, marketing expenses, and management fees, they earned just pennies per album. These contracts contain numerous pitfalls. The Byrds received advances against future royalties, creating label debt before earning a dollar. Columbia maintained ownership of master recordings, ensuring the label, not the artists, would profit from these recordings indefinitely. In 1967, just as the Byrds reached their creative peak with albums like Fifth Dimension and Younger Than Yesterday, Crosby was fired following disagreements over musical direction and his political outspokenness. After 3 years of success, he had little to show for it. No significant savings, no ownership of recordings, and now no steady income. The music industry operated like a company store. Artists seemed to earn good money, but the system kept them financially dependent on their next album or tour. For Crosby, these early contract decisions created financial vulnerability that would follow him for decades. Even as his artistic influence grew immeasurably, the seeds of financial ruin were already planted, waiting for the perfect storm to bring everything crashing down. While the Byrds' restrictive contracts had left Crosby with name recognition but empty pockets, his next musical venture would generate millions, yet somehow leave him in even worse financial shape. The creation of Crosby, Stills and Nash in 1969 marked the beginning of what should have been Crosby's path to financial security. When we heard Nash put on that third harmony, I thought I was gonna die. I thought my heart was gonna jump right through my mouth. It was about the rightest thing I ever heard. Crosby recalled about CSN's formation. Their debut album was an immediate hit, establishing them as rock's first true supergroup. When Neil Young joined for their sophomore album, Deja Vu, the group created a cultural landmark that dominated the charts for 97 weeks, eventually selling over 8 million copies. Stadium tours followed, bringing in unprecedented earnings that should have secured Crosby's future. As money began flowing in, Crosby purchased a 59-foot wooden schooner called the Mayan, built in 1947. The purchase highlighted a telling contradiction. Despite his band's skyrocketing success, Crosby had to borrow $25,000 from Peter Tork of the Monkees to buy the boat in 1967. This financial dependence revealed the gap between his public image of success and his actual cash flow problems, a pattern that would define his relationship with money for decades. The Mayan served as Crosby's floating creative sanctuary, a place to escape, write music, and find peace. He would often sail along the California coast, the polished deck gleaming in the sunlight as he worked out harmonies that would later define the California sound. But the yacht also became the perfect metaphor for his approach to money. Beautiful, inspiring, and a siren song of impractical luxury. The yacht's upkeep drained hundreds of thousands from his accounts over the decades, culminating in a mid-2000s refit costing over $600,000. CSNY's financial structure created additional complications. Unlike the Byrds' equal split arrangement, their earnings were heavily tied to songwriting credits, meaning songs like Wooden Ships, credited to Crosby and Stills, generated substantially different payouts than group performances. These publishing arrangements added financial complexity and tension within the band. From the outside, Crosby appeared to be living the rock star dream, sailing his yacht, performing at sold-out stadiums, and creating generation-defining music. The reality was starkly different. Despite substantial income from album sales and concerts, his financial foundation remained fragile, with each dollar spent as quickly as it arrived. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as Crosby began enjoying significant income, he developed expensive habits. His escalating drug use coincided with his financial success, creating a perfect storm where the perception of unlimited wealth masked his unsustainable spending. Crosby made a classic financial mistake that has ruined countless successful people. He lived as though peak earning years would never end. The yacht that symbolized freedom was actually an anchor weighing down his financial future, and a prelude to even more destructive decisions that would bring this folk rock legend to his knees. The gap between Crosby's public image and private reality grew more severe with each passing year. While fans admired the free-spirited musician sailing his expensive yacht, behind closed doors, his drug habit was rapidly becoming the biggest drain on his finances. One that would eventually consume his entire fortune. Never once until I got out of prison did I ever record, perform, or do anything anyway except stoned. I did it all stoned, Crosby later admitted. This constant impairment compromised his creative output, performance quality, and reliability, all critical factors for maintaining a successful music career. Studio sessions that should have taken days stretched into expensive weeks. The sounds of constant retakes, false starts, and rambling jam sessions filled recording studios as producers struggled to capture usable performances. The 1984 tour revealed how destructive his habit had become. In New York, he burned his room at the Vista International Hotel. At the Yankee Peddler in Torrington, Connecticut, he damaged furniture and fixtures. His tour booker, Michael Gaiman, revealed, "When David set fire to his hotel rooms, I paid the bills out of my pocket. I just wanted to keep everything going. I didn't want David to get arrested." A friend starkly assessed Crosby's situation. "David freebases pretty much from when he gets up to when he collapses. I think you can safely say that David has smoked up everything he owns. All the cars, everything." This wasn't hyperbole. Crosby was quite literally consuming his fortune, one expensive hit at a time. His appearance deteriorated noticeably, his once trim frame becoming gaunt, his eyes hollow and unfocused as he moved from stage to stage. In 1982, his arrest in Dallas on cocaine possession and weapons charges triggered a cascade of legal expenses. His manager, Elliot Casanova, revealed the crisis. David has some heavy legal fees to pay, and his expenses aren't small. David was short of money, especially at the beginning of the 1984 tour. He was broke. Promoters became increasingly hesitant to book him, further limiting his income during what should have been peak earning years. The financial devastation coincided with broader changes in the music industry. Album sales were declining from their 1970s peak, and Crosby's ability to profit from touring diminished with each incident of erratic behavior. By the mid-1980s, Crosby's house was no longer even in his name. Though he continued living there and making payments, this arrangement revealed just how precarious his situation had become. The musician who helped create rock's most enduring songs had essentially lost ownership of his own home. The true cost extended beyond money spent directly on drugs. Legal entanglements, property damage, lost professional opportunities, and deteriorating business relationships created a financial disaster that would soon lead to an even more dramatic reckoning with the consequences of his choices. Few musicians have paid a financial price as steep as David Crosby. His 1985 arrest was the trigger for a financial implosion that would leave him starting over from zero at age 45, with the IRS demanding millions he simply didn't have. The breaking point came in Mill Valley, California. Police arrested Crosby on charges that revealed a life spiraling out of control: drunk driving, hit and run, possession of a concealed pistol, and drug paraphernalia. These new charges compounded his existing legal problems, from the Dallas arrest involving a .45 caliber handgun and freebasing cocaine. As officers processed him at the station, Crosby faced a sobering reality. The voice that had harmonized on some of rock's greatest recordings was now answering an officer's procedural questions, facing years behind bars. His signature walrus mustache and long hair, once symbols of counterculture success, now framed a face marked by years of excess. His legal battles followed a clear timeline. In June 1983, Crosby was convicted on the Dallas charges, receiving a 5-year sentence for drugs and 3 concurrent years for the weapon. Yet it took until March 6, 1986, for him to begin serving time in a Texas state prison. As part of a plea bargain attempt before imprisonment, Crosby entered a New Jersey rehab facility but left after just 2 days because he wasn't allowed to have musical instruments. A revealing glimpse into his priorities at rock bottom. Even facing prison, music remained more important than his recovery. Though Crosby spent only 9 months behind bars, the financial devastation was profound. Legal fees alone had drained any remaining assets. According to his manager, Crosby needed $20,000 to $25,000 immediately just to keep his attorneys working on his case. An impossible sum for a musician whose income had evaporated due to addiction. The core of his financial nightmare was a $3 million IRS debt that accumulated during years when his addiction made record-keeping and financial management impossible. This massive tax burden would haunt him for over a decade, with payments stretching well into the 1990s. In an August 1985 interview before imprisonment, Crosby revealed his emotional state. "I'm real scared. I feel like I want to contribute. I'm not some destructive kind of criminal. I'm not. I don't think it's fair they put me in jail. I hope they don't." His vulnerable confession showed how completely his world had collapsed. When Crosby walked out of prison on August 8, 1986, he faced a stark reality. At 45, when many musicians enjoy the rewards of decades of work, he was starting below zero. His reputation was damaged, government debt loomed, and legal bills continued arriving. The combined impact of lost income, legal fees, and tax obligations created a financial crater so deep that even with a successful comeback, Crosby would struggle financially for decades. Freedom from prison came with a price tag he would never fully pay off. Crosby emerged from prison with newfound sobriety, but facing financial devastation. His journey back would prove both physically and financially challenging. In the late 1980s, He began rebuilding his career with small club performances, his once powerful voice slowly regaining its strength. The crowds were smaller, the venues less prestigious, but he was performing clean for the first time in decades. The early 1990s brought a critical turning point when Crosby's health collapsed. Years of drug abuse had ravaged his liver, and by 1994, he required a life-saving transplant. The procedure carried not just physical risk, but came with astronomical medical costs that further strained his fragile finances. One friend noted that the combination of past IRS debt and mounting medical bills created a financial hole so deep most people would never climb out. Against long odds, Crosby survived the transplant and continued his career comeback. He reunited with former bandmates for periodic CSN and CSNY tours, generating much-needed income. Yet the financial ground he'd lost during his addiction years proved difficult to regain. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, while peers like Neil Young carefully managed their catalogs and diversified their investments, Crosby focused simply on staying solvent. Between 2014 and 2021, Crosby experienced a genuine creative renaissance, releasing 5 solo albums that surprised critics and fans with their quality and emotional depth. Albums like Crows, 2014, Lighthouse, 2016, and For Free, 2021, showcased a songwriter whose skills had only deepened with age. They also revealed his tireless work ethic. At an age when most people retire, Crosby was touring relentlessly to support each release. Night after night, the aging rocker took stages across the country, his voice still powerful despite his body showing decades of hard living. In performance, he would often close his eyes tightly while reaching for the high notes that had defined the CSN sound, his weathered hands gripping the microphone stand for support. His final full concert at Red Rocks Amphitheater on September 17, 2019, saw him performing beneath the towering sandstone formations, a fitting venue for a rock legend's last major performance. As Crosby rebuilt his career, he also explored new business ventures. In his later years, he developed a craft cannabis brand called Mighty Crows with entrepreneur Stephen Sponder. As a longtime cannabis advocate, this venture aligned with both his counterculture values and financial needs. Yet even this business opportunity came too late to solve his deeper financial challenges. The economics of music had fundamentally changed. Streaming services replaced record sales, with brutal consequences for musicians like Crosby. He bluntly estimated that even 75 million plays on Spotify would generate only around $300,000, barely covering a year's expenses with his medical costs. The 3 main record companies are making, I was told, $19 million a day off of streaming, and the artists are getting shafted, Crosby pointed out, his voice rising with indignation as he highlighted the enormous gap between corporate profits and artist compensation. His criticism wasn't just bitterness. It reflected the harsh reality of how dramatically the industry had shifted beneath his feet. Then disaster struck. The pandemic of 2020 shut down live venues worldwide, eliminating his primary income source overnight. For a 78-year-old with ongoing health issues stemming from his liver transplant, the timing couldn't have been worse. The financial tightrope he'd walked for decades suddenly had no safety net. "You know they don't pay us for records anymore, right?" Crosby explained in one of his final interviews. "Touring is all we got. That's really the only thing that we can do to make any money. And to lose it is just awful. Honest to God, I may lose my home." For a rock legend with over 6 decades in the business, this financial precarity seemed incomprehensible to fans. Backed into a corner, Crosby made the painful decision many aging musicians face. In March 2021, he sold his entire music catalog to Irving Azoff's iconic artists group for a deal reported to be worth over $20 million. The sale included his solo work, as well as his work with the Byrds, CSN and CSNY, literally everything he had created over a lifetime. I didn't want to sell my publishing, man. I didn't want to sell a goddamn thing. I didn't have any goddamn choice, Crosby admitted with characteristic bluntness. The sale provided security for his family at the cost of relinquishing control over his life's creative output. After decades of making music, Crosby no longer owned the rights to a single song he had written. Not Wooden Ships, not Guinevere, not any of the works that had defined American music. For Crosby, the catalog sale solved an immediate crisis while creating a deeper emotional wound. The transaction granted him the financial security he'd lacked for decades, allowing him to pay off his home and ensure his family's stability. Yet it also marked the final surrender of his creative legacy, the very songs that had established him as one of rock's most distinctive voices. When David Crosby died in January 2023, he left behind a complicated financial legacy. His net worth at death was estimated at approximately $10 million. Substantial, but far less than expected for an artist of his stature and influence. The catalog sale had provided stability in his final years, but the permanent solution came too late for him to fully enjoy the fruits of his labors. In his final interviews, Crosby reflected on the irony of his situation. Having co-created some of the most valuable music in rock history, yet spending his later years struggling to maintain financial stability. The man whose harmonies had helped define an era had been forced to sell those very harmonies just to keep his home. Behind every hit record lies a forgotten lesson in financial survival. In his final years, Crosby offered blunt advice to young musicians. Don't become a musician. This wasn't bitterness. It was hard-earned wisdom from someone who'd watched the industry transform beneath his feet. Crosby's journey serves as a cautionary tale for all creative people. Looking back on his life, he admitted with painful honesty, "I made every mistake possible, all of it. I went right down the tubes until I was a junkie. It doesn't get any worse." Even in his late career, his financial motivations remained surprisingly basic. "I have a family and a mortgage, and I have to take care of them, so it's my only option." While Crosby struggled, contemporaries like Neil Young built sustainable careers through careful catalog management and diversified income streams. The contrast reveals that musical genius doesn't automatically translate to financial security. Careful business decisions matter just as much as creative ones. Crosby's three-part harmony with Stephen Stills and Graham Nash may have been perfect, but his financial harmony never materialized. His journey from Hollywood privilege to rock stardom, to prison, and finally, to selling his life's work, shows both the dizzying heights and crushing lows of the music business. The next time you hear those unmistakable harmonies on Wooden Ships or Almost Cut My Hair, remember this. Behind every magical recording lies the complicated reality of an artist who created beauty while struggling with the practical challenges of surviving in an unforgiving business. In an industry built on dreams, David Crosby's financial nightmare serves as a powerful reminder that even legends aren't immune to the hard realities of money. From the silver spoon childhood to the empty bank accounts of his final years, Crosby's story has come full circle. He began with Hollywood privilege and ended by selling the very songs that made him a legend. A cautionary tale about how easily money can slip through even the most talented fingers in the music industry.